Да, хоть нас весь тут народ русскоговорящий, но все равно лекция на английском придем, потому что мы так и
Записываем еще на видео.
еще да. Да, Катя, мы записываем на видео. Yeah, we were going to put this all on video. Alright, well, this is our third installment of the History of English lectures. I'm Ivan Baranov.
I'm Robyn Abakumov.
And today we'll be talking about William the Conqueror and Middle English. Last lecture we left off with the expulsion of the Vikings from England and the country's unification by King Ethelstan. Today we skip ahead to over 100 years later to the reign of Ethelstan's great-grandnephew, King Edward, during the late Anglo-Saxon period. Edward, who had come to gain the epithet the Confessor for his piety and celibacy, led the Anglo-Saxon England to the height of its wealth and power. His long reign would coincide with many different famous events on the British Isles. For one, Edward built the famous Westminster Abbey between the years 1042 and 1052. One of Edward's most powerful vassals, Earl Leofric of Mercia, was married to a woman named Lady Godiva. And in 1054, Edward would send a 10,000-man army north to Scotland to fight for the claim of a certain Prince Malcolm, who had killed the reigning Scottish king, Macbeth, who was the basis for Shakespeare's 1606 play. So, as you can tell, Edward's reign was a pretty eventful time for the British Isles. What is more important to our story, however, is Edward's death. Edward was a very virtuous king and became famous for his decision to remain celibate for his entire life, meaning he had no children to inherit the English crown. Edward also outlived all of his siblings, so no claimants. And so upon the death of King Edward on January 5th, 1066, the English crown went up for grabs. The first claimant would arise at Edward's deathbed. Earl Harold Godwinson, over here, was Edward's closest ally. Harold's father, Godwin, had helped Edward get back on the English throne from his Danish predecessor, a favor that would make Godwin, and by extension, Harold, the most powerful nobles in all of England. This influence also allowed Harold to marry Edward's sister, giving him a claim to the English crown. And so on his deathbed, Edward promised the crown to Harold Godwinson. For the second claimant, we need to head outside of England to the French province of Normandy. Edward had been exiled to Normandy while his Danish predecessor was king, and had promised the English crown to Duke William the Bastard of Normandy, his first cousin once removed. Third claimant would come from much farther north in Norway, from the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada. Edward's predecessor, the Danish king Harthacnut, had made a deal with the king of Norway, Magnus the Good, that they would inherit each other's thrones upon their deaths. Magnus's claim passed to his successor, Harald Hardrada, who also heard the news of Edward's death and also decided to fight for the crown. Now, there would immediately show up a favorite claimant. The Witan, which was the king's council in Anglo-Saxon England, convened the day after Edward's death and chose Harold Godwinson as the new king of England. And he was right there, and he was their favorite claimant as a natural Anglo-Saxon. At the same time, William the Bastard gathered an army in Normandy and prepared to land on the southern coast of England, but the winds were not in his favor. Back in the time, they didn't have triangular sails, so they couldn't swim up towards the wind, and so they just had to wait until the wind turned in their favor. And so he was delayed and had to wait for a little while. At that same time, Hardrada landed in the north of England, forcing Godwinson to march north, where on September the 25th, 1066, the two claimants met at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in Yorkshire. And though the Danes fought hard, the battle would be a major victory for Godwinson, with Hardrada being shot in the throat and killed early in the battle. This would be the last time any Viking army landed in all of England. So if you remember last lecture, for people who were here, we talked about the Vikings and the Viking Age. This is the moment that the Viking Age ends. 3 days after that battle, well, I'll let you process that for a second. This is like the single battle that kills all Viking spirit to ever invade England ever again. 3 days later, William the Conqueror lands in southern England, and Harold Godwinson had to march his entire battered and exhausted army through the entirety of England and would meet William the Bastard at the coastal town of Hastings on October the 14th, 1066, possibly the most important date in English history. At the Battle of Hastings, William's forces pretend to retreat following an unsuccessful attack, tricking Harold's forces into breaking their organization and getting encircled by the Normans, winning William the battle. In his desperate last stand, Harold Godwinson was shot and killed by an arrow to the eye, and thus William, the bastard, now known as William the Conqueror, would win his claim for the English throne. On Christmas Day of 1066, William the Conqueror would be crowned King of England. His descendants still rule England to this day, so the king we have right now, Charles III, is his great grandson. Not exactly that amount of greats, but you get the point. As we mentioned previously, William came from the Duchy of Normandy, which was a region in France, and a region in France does not speak Old English, which was the language that the Anglo-Saxons spoke before this point. And so, when William and his nobles came and conquered all of England, the language of nobility switched from Anglo-Saxon, or Old English, to Old French. And for 300 years, the nobility of England spoke Old French. These 300 years have the most important effect on the English language. Everything we talked about before is secondary to this one invasion and this one huge change to the language. The most obvious of these changes would be vocabulary. This is a bunch of word doubles. So a lot of Old English words had French synonyms. And so when William the Conqueror came over, there were a bunch of these double words, where it's just a synonym of an Old English word and an Old French word. This is why English has so many synonyms. It's because it has two languages worth of words in it. There's a bunch of words, obviously, here. There's exactly 114 word pairs, and I'm not going to expect you to look at them all. And so we're going to focus on these right here. If you want to look at the others, you can search it up. It's very easily accessible information. But yeah, this is one of the most famous examples of this linguistic change. It's the one all linguists use, and we're lazy, so we're going to use this one. It's livestock, as you can see. Pig, cow, chicken, sheep, deer, pork, beef, poultry. This is poultry, but it changed the spelling changed over time. Poultry, mutton, venison. Why is this? Well, an Old English farmer would slaughter a pig, cow, chicken, sheep, deer. And the farmer would call his liege lord an earl, but the French liege lord would call himself a count. And the count's chef, who in Old English would be a cook, would cook the pig, cow, chicken, deer, or sheep or deer, and would serve it on his French count's plate as pork, beef, poultry, mutton, or venison. That's why the animals are called the Old English word, and the meat is called the Old French word. Then, as another example, the Old English farmer would head to his seamster and buy a shirt and pants, while the French lord would journey to his tailor and purchase a blouse and trousers. Had the farmer eaten the chicken meat, he would have said, this chicken meat is good. Oh, you can see the spelling is a little off there because this is Old English spelling, just slightly modified for these words. If you were here for last lecture, by the way, we looked at Beowulf, and some of you noticed the word good over here spelled as God, just like a reference back to show this is Old English. And so yeah, the Old English farmer would say this chicken meat is good, but his French liege lord got the meal, and his response is, Iste poultry est magnificent. You can see that some of these words got dropped, but you can see the synonyms that survived.
Quick question for the audience. Can you notice anything that's different between this and the Old English we looked at last time, if you read the last lecture? Notice how the word this is spelled. If you remember in the last lecture, the TH sound was spelled like this. By this point, this letter, as well as ash and win, have disappeared from the English language and were replaced with the TH digraph, a regular A or E, and a W. which is something that was brought over by the French.
Yeah, this is how they're slightly linguistically different. Like how the late Anglo-Saxon period is different from the early Anglo-Saxon period that we talked about last lecture. But yeah, so you can see that some of these words were dropped, but this is how all these synonyms come up, and this is why English has so many different words for so many different different words for the same concept. No,
Already?
probably take it away. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. We'll look at many more different synonyms and the specific ways they're used in English. Because English is the language with the highest concentration of synonyms out of any languages out there. And it reflects in the way we think about our language, it reflects in the way that we use our language in ways you'll probably recognize once I mention it. So, what you notice over here, you have a bunch of word pairs. These are pretty frequent figures of speech like law and order. You'll never hear somebody say order and law. That sounds really ridiculous. You'll never hear somebody say deceased and cease. You have never once heard anybody say that. All of these are, for the most part, synonyms, yet we would never encounter them being used in reverse order. This is something that's called an irreversible binomial. Irreversible means you can't reverse it, binomial means there is two of them. Are there any others that you can think of? Off the top of your head, no worries if not. I'll give you a couple of seconds. No?
Jack and Jill.
Jack and Jill is actually one of the reversible binomials, and it also doesn't change order for quite a similar reason. Now, all languages have, to some extent, these irreversible word arrangements, but English is the most heavy on them. And the reason this happened is because in Old English courts, at the time of, like after the Norman invasion, they would have people speak both English in English and in French, because when it comes to law, it's really important that everybody understands what you mean. Everybody understands the punishment they're receiving. Everybody understands the particular nuance of the law that's being communicated. So important things like cease and desist, they would be said in both Old English. Cease is an Old English word, and desist, which is a French word. Same thing here. Law is Old English. Order is French. Will is Old English. Testament is French. As a general rule, if you're wondering which word is which, if it's short and rather simple, it's probably Old English. If it's long and sounds kind of pretentious, it's probably French. There exists like a rule for how to determine if it's called the bullshit detector. If something you're reading has a lot of words of French origin, it's probably bullshit. If it has mostly words of English origin, like 80% of it is English origin, and yes, sometimes you encounter a French word, then it's mostly somebody actually trying to communicate with you. Using like order, deceased, testament, and other words in the same vein, excessively, like aspiration sort of goals, like who does that? If you're doing that, it feels like you're trying to come off as smarter than you are and deceive the reader with unnecessary complicated vocabulary. Not always, but it's a rule, and I found that usually this rule holds true. Now, beyond the first four, we kind of get the ones that are not really related to law, but that is because this way of speaking that appeared in courts and in a lot of other formal contexts of high importance, this method of speaking has trickled down into all areas of society. People by association have started saying instead of just crash or burn, crash and burn, instead of bits or pieces, bits and pieces. People who speak English have the highest tendency of any other group of people to do this, of any other linguistic group, to say the same thing in many different ways. Way, shape, or form. Anything like this does not exist in any other language. It's specifically an English phenomenon of saying the same thing in multiple different ways for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Let's see, do we have any other interesting ones I want to point out?
But yeah, so if the court sentences you to be cut into bits and pieces, you have to make sure that the person understands they're being cut into bits and pieces.
I actually don't, is that like an actual punishment that could have existed back then?
Probably.
Yeah, bits and pieces does not come from a legal context, although this has arisen by association with the ones up here.
Word order is very important in languages, and there are many languages where word order matters more than others. Something that we talked about in the past, you might recall, is analytical and synthetic languages. I'm going to write this out on the board because it's important. And you're good.
Yeah, a good example of that is there's a punishment in the medieval era called hanging, drawing, and quartering. It's where you first hang someone, you stretch them out, and then you cut off their limbs. And hanging and drawing are Old English words, and quartering is an Old French word. So,
Yeah, most of these you have French word comes second. Obviously, things like it doesn't go for things like salt and pepper and flesh and bone. These ones are different. And these ones are just merely by association, but we still wouldn't say pepper and salt, or bone and flesh, or kisses and hugs, even though it's no longer direct correlation to the actual Old English and Old French etymologies. Back into the analytical and synthetic languages. If you recall, a language that is analytical is a language that uses a lot of prepositions to communicate the meaning of the sentence, while a language that's synthetic doesn't use as many prepositions. It mostly modifies the word itself. For example, Russian is a synthetic language because in Russian you can change the very last bit of the word and it can communicate whether it's first, second, or third person, whether it's plural or singular, whether if it's a noun, you can communicate what case it is in. Maybe it's a nominative case where I'm the one doing this action. Maybe it's the accusative case where I'm the one to whom this action is being done. In English, you just have this with pronouns. You'll say like, I don't know, he killed her, or she killed him. Sorry, I'm like on the gory theme of our examples. You'll see that we have he and her. They switched places over here, but they also changed their form. In most synthetic languages, this happens across all nouns. That's true for Spanish, that's true for Russian, that's true for Greek. And in this sentence, if I change it to her, he killed, it sounds a little bit Shakespearean, and that's because back in Shakespeare's time there was more freedom with word order, but you can still perfectly understand who did the killing. While if I replace these with nouns, so I'll say, I don't know, the dog killed the cat. If I start changing around the word over here and saying the dog the cat killed, or killed the dog the cat, it will get really confusing as to who is actually doing the killing, because these nouns do not change form, so we can't tell who is doing the action. That's why the word order is so important over here. While here, it's a little bit less important. Now, in synthetic languages, typically as a rule, word order doesn't matter too much. In analytical languages, such as English is, hello?
Hello.
Hi.
hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
In analytical languages such as English, at least the way it is nowadays, word order matters a lot, because if you change up word order, it's difficult to tell who is doing the action. For example, with he killed her or she killed him, we can tell based on the form of the pronoun who is doing the action. You know that he and she are the one who is doing the action, her and him are the one who the action is being done to. While if we replace it with nouns, we get the dog killed the cat or the cat killed the dog. The form doesn't change, so we have to rely on the word order to be there. We start changing it, the dog the cat killed, or killed the cat the dog, we get lost, we don't know what's happening. Not an issue in synthetic languages. And in synthetic languages, you also have word orders. You even have these pairs where you can even switch up the order. But the word order is much more relaxed there. And different languages have different amounts of power that they exert over word order. Sometimes you don't care about it at all. Sometimes you care about it a little. Sometimes you care about it a lot. Or as you do in English, you care about it so much that you don't even realize when you are using it. For example, let's see. Take the phrase, the big red house. Sounds like a normal phrase, right? Imagine I say the red big house. Suddenly it sounds odd. You've never once in your life heard anybody say the red big house. In fact, it's so odd that you hear it and you're like, yeah, this does not make sense. This is something called the adjective order. Now, again, as we had with these over here, we had law and order, cease and desist be like a direct influence of French, while most of these were a corollary influence of French. It wasn't directly people using English and French directly, it was by association with law and order and cease and desist that people started saying rain or shine or goals and aspirations and not the other way. A similar, even less direct cause of this phenomenon, yep, thank you, is the adjective order. There are 8 different categories for adjectives, and when you're describing a noun, you always say the opinion adjective, the very first one. For example, good or bad. Maybe it's things like, I have opinion adjectives, like uncomfortable or pleasant. Things that express your opinion, they go the very first. After that, you have size, age, shape, color, material, origin, and purpose. So, for example, you would say a nice hot cup of tea. Not how I wanted to phrase it. I would say nice hot. Yeah, I'll stick with nice hot cup of tea. Nice hot cup of tea. You would say hot nice cup of tea. You could say, for example, let's see, what's another interesting one? Feel free to pipe in if you come up with it.
Yeah, the fun challenge is putting all of them in.
Yeah.
Does
this
anyone
was
want to try to do
pretty
one with
difficult,
all
yeah.
the adjectives?
I once had my students do it. It took them like 3 minutes to find something that like makes a little bit of sense, because most nouns can't accept all the adjectives out there.
Do you have a volunteer? Try to put, how many adjectives is that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice, big, day old, triangular, white, wooden, Russian, disposable cup of tea.
Triangular. What color did you say it was?
White.
Amazing.
I'm not sure about disposable.
White.
I'm thinking about something else.
What did you say it was made out of?
Wooden.
Wooden. Oh, white, wooden, and disposable.
No, Russian.
Russian. Purpose.
Disposable.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. I wasn't thinking about disposable. I was thinking about
Disposable.
throwaway.
Single use. You could have said a teacup, but yeah, I think cup of tea has a better ring to it.
Another example of word order. Yeah, that's perfect example. Doesn't make complete sense, but yeah, if you try rearranging the words in here, you'll get a big, nice, day old. Sounds kind of odd if you say, hold on, disposable Russian wooden white triangular day old big nice cup of tea. Nobody says that.
I take back disposable and
Replace it with
throw away. I replace it with sacrificial.
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 Sacrificial cup.
Do you want to fix that over there?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Uh,
But yeah, and this only works because of the Norman invasion, because the French language got included in English. This is why the word order is the way it is, and that is why, like, if that invasion hadn't happened, it would be a completely different word order.
First of all, we would have a completely different vocabulary.
Yeah.
A lot of the English vocabulary is either French, or it was brought into English through French, even if French later lost these words. But yeah, because we all know about the words that we borrowed from the English language, again, on the previous slide over here, you can guess in these first few word pairings which word was English, which word was French. Will, obviously English, that's not always the French.
There are some fun exceptions though. For example, like the two words rock and stone. Like, which one do you think is Old French? Rock or stone?
So
You're right, it's rock. But rock sounds so much more like barbaric. It's like, come on, rock.
Yeah.
And stone sounds so much more refined, but stone is actually the Old English word, and rock is the Old French. Just a fun fact for you.
It is generally interesting the way we perceive words, because yes, we most perceive more like sophisticated words to be of French origin, even though there is no inherent reason for that. There is no reason why in general we perceive, like we hear somebody speak French and you're like, oh my god, so fancy, so posh, wow. There is no intrinsic reason to like the way the sounds are arranged in French language for us to think that. It's usually the other way around. We think that words that sound French, we think that they're fancy because they're French. It's because of how much influence France has had on the entire world, especially on the English-speaking world, both at the time when this lecture is set and after the lecture. Not after the lecture, after the time this lecture covers.
And there's some really strange words that don't exist in Old English. For example, when I was making that sentence, the chicken meat is good, I was going to use taste originally. And then I looked it up. Taste, there was no equivalent for the word taste in Old English. Taste is an old French word, even though it sounds like very basic and like sounds like a word that's fundamental to the English language, but it isn't.
On the topic of basic words, it is a general phenomenon with languages where words that we consider basic, like words for colors or words for emotions, frequently do not exist in other languages. If you speak Russian, which I believe is all of you,
Yeah.
you probably know that we have one more color category than English does. What's that extra color category?
Голубой-синий.
Голубой. Yeah, голубой and синий distinction. Right. The most basic color categories, and color categories don't include things like blonde, because blonde only applies to a particular object. You wouldn't describe something of the same color as hair, but it's not hair, as blonde. You would generally do that. And you would include more specific examples like crimson for red, or chartreuse for green. Did you know that chartreuse is a green color? It sounds like a red color, but it is a green color. The main categories, which is the red, orange, yellow, black, white, and so on, there is 12 of them, and very few languages have all 12. That's Russian, Italian, and Hebrew, and I think there was another one, but I can't recall it off the top of my head. Most languages have fewer than that. For example, 11 or 10. English is in the 11 category. Some languages only have 2. There are some African languages that only have the distinction between dark colors and light colors, or warm colors and cold colors, and everything else is a sub-color category. The same way crimson is a kind of red. For them, red would be a kind of warm colors.
For example, have any of you ever read the Iliad? And very, very early on in the Iliad, Homer calls the sea wine dark. It's because there was no word for blue at that time. So you had to describe it in some way without saying the word blue. And it only showed up in Greek a lot later, probably 800 years later. So,
yeah. Where was it? Emotions. That's also the case for emotions. There is a particular Russian emotion that feels very intrinsically Russian. It's called toska. Does not exist in English. There is no direct translation of toska into English, but it does exist in Portuguese. The Portuguese word saudade means toska exactly. So you would assume that because it exists in so many languages, it's a pretty basic emotion. It is not. It does not exist in English at all whatsoever. And that generally reflects on, for example, the kind of literature that Russian writers write or Portuguese writers write versus what English writers would write. Back into the topic. Where was I? Where was I? Remind me, please.
and that English became an analytical language because of the influence from French.
Yeah.
Yeah, if any of you people here speak French, you will know that French, like, endings don't change. And synthetic is all about how endings change. It's like, for example, in Russian, if you translate this sentence analytical, he killed her, он ее убил. But if she killed him, она убила его. And that's really what synthetic is. It's things changing on the ends of words, while analytical is things changing before these words.
Those of you who read all 3 of our lectures, including this one, might have noticed that we've hyperfixated on analytical and synthetic. You'll see later why that is the case. I'll start slowly edging my way.
And
This is
yeah.
very.
Yeah, and
Outline.
on our old English lecture, some of the people who were here noticed that it was a synthetic language, but because of French, it became analytical.
And we'll see why that happened. French is primarily a Latin language. For example, over here, a Romance language. Over here, most of these words are of Latin origin. It was a vernacular. It was called Vulgar Latin that spread throughout a lot of Europe, and that's what later changed into Italian, Spanish,
Portuguese,
Romanian, and French. But French also had some other influence. It had influence from see over here. The Frankish language, which is a Germanic language, it's what loaned the name to French. And it's interesting, so many English words of French origin, but the word French itself is Germanic. We have the words castle, war, marshal, garden, abandon, bacon, sash, furnish, and many other ones that were originally Frankish. They were of Germanic origin. And you would think they would also exist in English, but what actually ended up happening, because as you remember, English is a Germanic language, what actually ended up happening is that these words traveled into French and then they got reintroduced into English. Because the common ancestor of Frankish and English, Proto-Germanic, had these words. Frankish maintained them. English either lost them or had them change form, but French brought them back after the Norman Conquest. And that has happened many different times with many different Germanic languages. You might recall with Old Norse, introduced a lot of different words into English, such as, for example, the word skate, or the word skirt. Instead of the English words shate and shirt that have changed form. They used to be skate and skirt, but they have changed to ease pronunciation because the sound sh is much easier to make than the sound sk. It's two sounds and they're pretty different parts of the mouth. S is near the front, k is near the back. But in Old Norse they maintained that way and then they later got introduced into English. Same story here with these words over here. Some other minor influences of Frankish into French is, for example, in many places where French would have a beginning of the word, the H letter. You know that the H letter is not pronounced in any Romance languages at all. And it is pretty heavily pronounced in Germanic languages. Not heavily pronounced, but we do use it. What happened over there is because of the Frankish presence where France currently is, this H sound has entered the phonetic library of France, but it didn't become a phoneme. A phoneme is a sound that people who speak a language use to actually communicate meaning, right? So what does this mean? This means that if somebody were to use the H sound instead of not using it, it would have changed the meaning of the word. This wasn't the case, but because it was present, many people who speak French now, they try to speak English, they will confuse where H should be present or where it should not be present. It's not an issue for people who don't have the H sound at all in their language, because they just learn this language, learn this new sound as they would learn any other new sound in the language. It's not an issue for people who have this distinction, obviously. It is an issue for French people. For example, it's a pretty good mistake for people to say is that they play hockey on the highs instead of hockey on the ice. And the reason this happens is because silence and the H sound are stored in the same place in the French mind. They're essentially the same. Using one instead of the other doesn't change the meaning. It's just that an example with the English language is, for example, if you're trying to learn Chinese and you're trying to learn their tones, you'll find a lot of difficulty because we actually do use different tones all the time when we speak English, but you don't pay much attention to it. If we didn't use tones, it would make it so much easier for us to learn about these tones and notice them. But because we have programmed in our mind to not notice this distinction, we do not do that. Another example is, for example, the aspirated sounds, which was also French influence, because the aspirated sounds, they used to be much more prominent in English. An example of an aspirated sound, we don't know what that means. If you say the word top and stop, and you put your hand in front of your mouth when you do that, do it right now. Top,
Stop.
stop. Have you noticed that there is a difference in the amount of air released on the T in the two words? A little bit, yeah. That's because in top, the T is aspirated. In linguistics, we usually write it like this. This little H over here means that we release air. And in stop, it is not aspirated. It does not release air. And these aspirated and unaspirated sounds used to be a lot more prominent in English. They used to be very prominent in Greek, where we borrowed a lot of the letters through Latin for our alphabet. That's, for example, this letter over here, the Greek letter theta, it used to make the aspirated T sound, while tau made the unaspirated T sound. They were so different that they had different letters for them. That's sort of why In modern English, we write the th because this letter later evolved to make the th sound. This is why we write th as th, because it used to be the aspirated t, but it later morphed into th. Now, this is a subconscious difference. If you encounter somebody pronouncing all of those sounds as the same, you probably wouldn't even notice it, and even if you did, you would not be able to put your finger on what's wrong, because you just saw that you weren't quite aware of this difference just yet, until now. And this is what's difficult, for example, for people who are learning South Asian languages like Hindi or Tamil, because in those languages, if you use the wrong T, if you use the aspirated T instead of the unaspirated T, for example, it can change the meaning of the word, which is quite unfortunate. Off the top of my head, I think I've used this example in the past, but not with you guys. So if you have these three words over here, the first one means tiger, the second one means run, and the third one means garden. Very different words. And to the English ear, they sound the same. The only difference is this aspiration that you put on the particular consonant. A similar issue is happening with French people who are trying to learn English, because in their mind, it's not just that the H and the absence of a sound are different things, it's because in their mind it is the same thing, so they don't hear the difference and they can't exactly replicate it.
And so they say he killed her instead of he killed her. And
Yeah.
this is the change that Old French got wrong, because like Old English had a very pronounced h, like for example how Russian does, where you make a h sound, it's h, like he killed her. And French doesn't have that at all, it's he killed her. And they were caught in that middle point, that where French French did not yet kill its H, while English still had the h, which is why we in modern English say h, like he, not a he.
Yeah.
So in words like honor, when H is not pronounced, does it mean they have French origin?
Yeah. Honor
Yeah.
is a like classic French word, yeah, and it's one of the words that just got almost entirely burned forth.
Air.
But the reason you don't notice this issue with people whose first language is Spanish, they're trying to learn English, you don't notice a lot of this confusion appearing, is because in Spanish, they didn't have the Frankish influence, they didn't have the H introduced at all, so to them it's a new sound. The same way, if your first language is Russian, then you learn English, the would be a new sound to you. You didn't have the issue of you confuse it with another sound already existing in a new language, because now it's a brand new sound. For French people, it is not. On the topic of aspiration, if you ever go to France and you have a perfect accent, at least you think, but they still can figure out what's wrong with you, sorry, but something is wrong with you. It's because of the aspiration, because French has zero aspiration, while English, while French did a really good job trying to kill it, still has it surviving in this very weird form where you're consciously aware of it, but you are subconsciously aware of it and you insert it into words. If you start speaking French, you'll sometimes insert aspiration, because you have a habit of doing it, into French words that don't have aspiration ever, and this is what the English accent or the American accent most frequently is in places like France or Spain or other places that don't have aspiration, that speak Romance languages. Now,
The next influence of French would be Gaulish.
and another.
Who here went to our first lecture? Do we have anyone who went to our first lecture? Yeah. You can recall that we talked about how the Romans invaded Britannia, which had Celtic peoples there. And what's strange is that the biggest amount of Celtic words does not come from the original Celtic people who lived in England, but from the Celtic people who lived in France and whose words got incorporated into the French language, and they spoke Gaulish.
Yeah, French used to be called Gaul. The three main influences on French language is Latin, the biggest one, because French descended from Latin. And then you have Frankish and Gaulish. We'll be fixating a lot on Celtic languages in this lecture series, and today we'll also see why we have been doing that, because Celtic languages have actually had a very big influence on all Romance languages. and through that they had an indirect influence on English. You'll get there in a second. Firstly, a quick question. Obviously, I selected these words myself. This is a very small sample size, so it might be hard to tell, it might be easy to tell, depends on how good of a job I did. But do you notice any leanings or tendency in these words versus these words over here? I can switch back and forth a couple more times. I should have put them on the same slide.
Repetitive, like broccoli or vasasal.
That is actually
And see.
a very good observation. These do have a lot of repeated letters, and that's because they used to make a longer sound, which was more of a Celtic phenomenon than a Germanic one. Germanic languages such as English or Frankish also had a difference in what the sound is, if it's short and long. That's why we have different spellings for when we have like one N or two N's, one S or two S's. But Celtic languages had so much more of that. And that's a very good observation. You weren't at the first lecture, so you couldn't even have remembered me mentioning that. But I'm more looking at the meaning of the words right now, rather than the words themselves. Although if you notice something about the words themselves, feel free to mention it. The meanings of the word is that the French words lean more into the war theme, while Gaulish words typically do not do that. You have words that have to do with government, you have to do words that have to do with everyday life. For example, broccoli, I think you eat. Frown, I think you do, if you have to eat broccoli. While over here, you mostly have, not mostly, but you have a lot of words that have to do with war. Castle, war, marshal. And that is no accident. The Frankish language had a much greater influence on the war speak of French, which then in turn had a very minor influence on the war speak of English.
Franks were the people who invaded Gaul, or France, after the Roman Empire fell, and so thus they had all the war words that came into the French language and then into English.
The people who arrived who spoke Volga Latin, a bit later became French, they weren't going to take war advice from the Gauls who got lifted by the Franks. They took war advice from the Franks and borrowed all of their vocabulary. Now, what is it so special about the Gauls and the Celts? Something that we mentioned a couple lectures back is that the Celts, they made a lot of very heavy emphasis onto the first part of the word. The stress always went into that syllable, and that's the syllable that got overly emphasized the most. The reason that is important is because in the languages like, for example, that's why we have the silent E in English. That's because the very end of the word became so unimportant that sometimes it got dropped all together. And that's also what happened to French. Because if you know one thing about French, it's the fact that half the letters in French are silent. And it's mostly the letters near the end. Which is difficult if you're trying to learn French. Because if you're just trying to learn conjugation, we do not have an eraser, and that is incredibly unfortunate. Oh well. It is what it is. For example, the present tense conjugations of the verbs. For example, if you have the word parler to speak, you get parle for when it's first person singular. So for example, I speak, je parle. If it's second, it's parle with an S. If it's third, it's again parle. If it's a plural, so for example, the first one is nous parlons, we speak. Second one is vous parlez. And third one is they parle. This entire thing is not pronounced. This word is pronounced the same as this one over here, which is needlessly complicated. Does the concept of conjugation make sense? Yeah. If you're trying to learn French as a language, which is a mistake I have made in the past, you'll run into this and it's going to be difficult, and it doesn't end here. It's true across all tenses. There is 3 different categories of verbs. There is like, you have to memorize this for 1/3 of the verbs, and then you have two more that you have to memorize for verbs that end in IR or AR. And it's needlessly complicated. The reason this happens is because of the Gaulish influence and the emphasis on the first part of the word. The second part of the word became so unimportant that it would just get skipped in faster speech. That's why other Romance languages don't have this. This is particular a French phenomenon of dropping the endings like that. Now, why is that important? If you recall, I mentioned that French is a synthetic language. That means it's a language where the ending of the word matters. It expresses the tense, it expresses the person, it expresses singular versus plural, and it can also express case. Who wants to remind us what a case is? Who was at the previous lecture?
We're all Russian speakers here, so cases are подержи. Yeah.
Yeah, but this example I had over here with, oh no, I erased it. He killed her versus she killed him. He and she are nominative, that's the person doing the action, именительный. And her and him are accusative, винительный, that's the person to whom the action is being done to. The Russian language has 6 main cases, and it also has 9 secret cases that you don't learn about in school because they're very infrequently used. I can tell you about them after the lecture if you're curious. The English language used to have 4 cases. It had the nominative, it had the nominative, it had the accusative, it had the genitive, which is the one case that survived. That's when you have possession of something. That's the apostrophe s that we have. This is a case ending that English still somehow managed to maintain. And it also has the dative. That's when you the indirect object of something. Instead of saying I cooked soup for Vanya, I cooked Vanya soup. You know that even though I said both Vanya and soup, I used them as nouns. You know that soup is the thing I'm cooking. Vanya is the person I'm cooking it for. So Vanya is in here the indirect object. He's the dative case. French also used to have cases, but it lost them very quickly, particularly because of this. In fact, even though the Celtic influence was weak for other Romance languages, it did influence other Romance languages. That's why none of them have cases. That's why Spanish has lost cases, that's why Italian has lost cases, that's why Portuguese has lost cases, all because of the Celtic influence on the Middle Romance languages, yeah?
Did the Latin have the cases?
Latin did have cases, yes.
Okay.
It had 7, I'm pretty sure.
And because French lost most of those cases, but not all of them, is why English has just 1 case and not 0.
Yeah. Well, it technically has 2. It has like
Yeah.
the nominative case, which is like, it's also called the normal case because you usually use nominative when you have the accusative. You don't have accusative in English, it's just normal, and the possessive. Lame words. I wish I still use nominative, accusative. They sound cooler. They sound more French.
Yeah, and the third influence on the French and thus the English language is Latin. Yeah.
Latin, yes. That was like the one we started with like all the examples of words. It was the most prominent influence.
Yeah.
We borrowed the what's the word? The alphabet from them. We borrowed the most vocabulary from that branch. And now, I think it would be fun if we bring all of this together and we look at a particular text. Does anybody know who this is? I don't expect you to know who this is, but this is Geoffrey Chaucer. He is, at the last lecture we looked at Beowulf, which was a very, very long text written in Old English, and that's the best work we have that preserved from Old English, and that's what we used to find out what Old English used to be like. Chaucer is the one who wrote the Canterbury Tales, which we used to find out what Middle English was like. It's not the only text that we have survived. In fact, we also have a few texts that survived that help us translate Old English into Middle English because they exist in both of those. But we will not be looking at those today. Today I want to look at the Canterbury Tales, his magnum opus. They were written in the late 14th century. This was around the time where English has started becoming a more and more prominent language. It has started pushing out French.
Yeah, in the 14th century, in the middle, there was a thing called the 100 Years' War, where the English fought against the French. And at that point, they started speaking Middle English in Parliament. Before that, for 300 years, they spoke Old French. And so,
Middle French.
yeah, Middle French. And at this point, English is actually like starting to take root, and it's like Middle English now, no longer two separate languages that are trying to mix together. Chaucer is called the father of English literature because of the Canterbury Tales, and so this can be considered one of the first works of recognizable English.
If you remember Beowulf, it was very difficult to decipher. We deciphered a few words and we called it a day. Here, oh no, it's cropped weirdly, but that's okay. Can you see all of that? Okay. Let's start deciphering. Let's try figuring out what all this means. What's the first word? When, yeah, when, April.
That, and
With his, see, April is humanized. All the forces of nature humanized in here.
which is why capitalized.
Yeah.
Showers?
Showers, that's right. This one was difficult.
So is it soot or
Oh. I completely blanked with this one. We'll take a look later. Oh my god. Oh my god.
all right? Second line.
Yeah. Feel free to like jump around over here. What's this word?
Drought.
Yeah. This one?
March.
Let's see. Oh. Do you know what this is?
The wind.
Yeah, it's Zephyr, a wind, again it's capitalized here because forces of nature capitalized. Here, what do we have here? This word is actually very easy to guess. I'll give you a hint, it's exactly as it's written. Ram, yeah. Why do you think the ram is mentioned here?
Why is it in capitalized?
Because forces of nature, so April, March, the wind, Zephyrus, they are all capitalized over here. And there is, because a ram is an animal, so it probably refers to a different kind of ram, maybe a particular kind of ram. A one of a kind of ram. As in the ram, his half course, so the ram has completed half of his course. What could this be referring to? It's a difficult question, yeah. Oh, I heard the correct answer.
I don't know how to say it in English.
Zodiac.
Yeah, it's the zodiac, Ram and Aries, same exact thing. And the cut between March through April is when Aries, where the sun is halfway through Aries, and that's what we have over here. The young sun, it's young because the astronomical new year begins at the end of March, when the sun enters Aries. And we have the young sun, have in the Ram his half course Iran. So when the young sun has completed half his course through Ram, before moving on to the next zodiac, which is the next one.
But yeah, you can tell that a lot of these words are in modern English, right? Like you can see flower, liquor, well, obviously drought, March. These are words that you recognize, and so because of you can see that this is like actually English showing up here. It's no longer some cryptic old language. Yeah.
Robyn, I have a question on this text. So this is 14th century from Chaucer. So one thing I learned at some point is that these the articles, right?
Mm-hmm.
They came from from one, there from that.
Yeah, that's
right?
exactly right.
And sometimes we even say like one, whatever. My question is like, I see both that here and there. So at that point, articles already evolved into their forms like that.
That's
and
right.
Okay.
In the Old English lecture, we looked at the fact that there used to be a lot more articles because again, English had cases, and there used to be each article would also change its form based on the case, which was incredibly confusing for any old Russians trying to learn Old English. But yeah, you could see that the words like that, these, those, and that all were rather similar, and they have later spread out more, so they have done Bible English, and the same thing with words like one and
English not revealed in translation.
yeah.
What it is.
So it was way before 14th century.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, this is 300 years after Norman Conquest, where all of this language mixing is complete. Yeah. And you can tell here that most of the words exist in the modern world. They just like change some spelling and some pronunciation, and that the essence of each sentence. Like we just deciphered it, and we mostly understood what they meant.
Any questions about anything in the translation? Fruit.
Yeah, where did fruit come from?
Sud means fruit.
No, sweet. Is it just the sweet means sweet fruit?
You're right. Thank you for catching that. Sweet with fruit. Sweet with fruit is one adjective here. So Chaucer's sweetness or sweet with fruit. It's used as one word. So that's what sweet means. It has gone out of style, unfortunately. I think it's a cool word. We can bring it back.
There is still a word like soothing, which is close to sweeting, right?
I actually don't know if soothing comes from soot. It might. I want to believe that it does, but I'm not gonna say with certainty because I don't know off the top of my head. So you have the root, and it even rhymes, which is really nice because it helps us figure out what words used to rhyme.
Like liquor and flour, those don't really rhyme anymore, right? But back in they did liquor and floor.
Okay, one more thing.
Yeah.
It's like the second to last line.
Mhm.
This is like crops.
Yeah.
Is that where the word crops comes from?
Yeah.
It's translated to shoot
That's
and
crops. That's
Yeah, like
exactly
a crop would crop back in the day, but it no longer does. But yeah, so the thing about Old English is that all the words that we have today are already here. And the next, 600 years are all just dedicated to those words slightly changing in meaning and in spelling. And
Sonne is German sun, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. And English is Germanic languages, so it does make sense. You notice that it's spelled with an O. The reason this happens,
is our next lecture, right?
it is because it's the printing press. Should I talk about the printing press now?
No, let's talk about the printing
Let's talk
press.
about the printing press next lecture. This was one of the first texts to be printed on the printing press. It appeared in the 1440. Chaucer died in
1400.
1400
So
exactly.
40 years after his death.
Yeah. The Canterbury Tales, it was never finished. Chaucer had this grand genius idea to write a story about 30 people traveling from London to Canterbury, and on the way there, each one of them would tell 2 different short stories to the rest of the group, and on the way back, each one would again share 2 different short stories to the rest of the group, bringing the total up to 120 different short stories. Chaucer thought this was genius because 120 short stories is much easier to write than one really big one where you have to keep track of everything. But he was wrong because he only wrote 24 short stories,
And-
20% of what he aimed to do.
And died before he could finish all of them. But he had like a crazy amount of funding. The king at the time, Richard II, he was a really big arts guy. If you guys know any Shakespeare plays, there's a play called Richard II. It's about Geoffrey Chaucer's fun there. But yeah, so
To end on a motivational note,
yeah.
even if you have a great idea and you only finish it 20% of the way, it'll still be studied
For 600 years onward. But yeah.
600 years onwards.
So as I just said, yeah, all of the words are already here, and what happens in the next 600 years to make them the way they are today? That's not a question you're supposed to answer because that's going to be the subject of our next lecture. Yeah.
We'll see you here in about a month, about
Yeah,
a month and a half,
hopefully.
4th installment of the history of English.
We're going to talk about a thing called the Great Vowel Shift, which is how vowels, shift, and why why Zon becomes sun, and we're going to talk about William Shakespeare and his plays.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Yeah, anyone who's particularly bored is free to go. Yeah, I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions?
Actually, wait, I do. I have a
Yeah, yeah.
question. So Robyn, right? Like in the first half of the lecture, mentioned that toska, the Russian word, right,
Yeah.
can't be translated into English. What about longing?
Longing is a common translation, but it misses the nuance of the word toska. Because when you're longing for something. Toska, you can use it without necessarily needing a subject that you are longing for. It can be just longing about. You can. Просто тосковать.
Yeah, Tasca can mean different things. For example, melancholy and longing, they both mean Tasca, but you can't, you have to separate them out, right? It's like how in English, the example of blue and light blue, голубой и синий. You could say in English all with one word, blue. Tasca is basically the same thing. You can say longing and melancholy in one word, and based on context, you interpret it.
В обратную сторону.
I think I understand what you're saying. Like Tosca is generalization.
Yeah.
Okay, so well because very close to Tosca is spleen. But spleen is almost like a illness, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. What about
mental illness? But it's not. It could be Tosca. It could be something else. However, I think spleen is the closest translation to Tosca, at least according to, I think it's Pushkin, right?
What is, yeah,
You said,
Did you say blue as in feeling blue or the color blue?
the color. just the
Oh, what
color.
about feeling blue as
Feeling
Tosca?
blue?
feeling blue?
Like
No,
blues.
that's not, that's, feeling blue is more,
Just being
it has,
sad.
it has depression vibes,
It's the exact translation means like exact. There are very similar words like spleen and
Yeah.
melancholy and longing, but none of them capture like the exact essence, not the exact connotation.
there are linguistic extremists who say that no two words across any languages can possibly have the same meaning, because like even the English word cat and the Russian word koshka are inherently different in the connotations and the feeling we get when we hear those words, which I really enjoy this outlook on languages. I think it's a bit of an extreme one, but when it comes to emotion, it's much more clear that difference is really there. And again, as I said earlier, saudade and tosca, they essentially describe the same thing. But like, if you take a person who speaks Russian and Portuguese fluently, I'm certain they'll find ways to differentiate it and say, I'm feeling more tosca right now than saudade, or more saudade right now than tosca.
Moving on from
Yeah.
okay, black and white. Are these English and French or just, you know?
They're both English. Black
Okay.
black comes from Old German. So yeah, black is a German word. Blach. White is also a Germanic word. White, it used to be said white, and the French equivalent is blank. And yeah, well, that's black and white for you. Also, fun fact: the black and the German word schwarz, they used to mean two different things in English, but schwarz got dropped, and black just means all versions of black now.
I'm saying black and white in the context of you cannot say white and black.
Oh,
Yeah, word doubles, yeah.
Yeah,
Word
irreversible
doubles.
binomials.
Yeah, it
This-
is also an irreversible.
Yeah,
So it's just it's not because of French. It's
Yeah, it's because people just said it
it's
so
a
much.
consequence. How about brick and
brick and mortar is
Another,
also a
yeah,
good one.
yeah.
I was gonna put it on that, and I was like, this is too much wordplay.
Is this English and French or no?
Mortar
Brick
should be a
and
French word. So brick is definitely Germanic, mortar is an old French word, so that is example of both, because it's not related to law, but it is an example of two words. Plus brick and mortar are two different materials. So yeah, it's a more like common.
Black and white is a good example because in Russian also черно-белый, you wouldn't say бело-черный. That's weird. And to drive home the point that this exists in all languages have word orders, all languages have irreversible binomials, just that in English there is so many more of them, and the reason for that is French and English, even though French is not the direct cause of them all the time. The reason for this fun thing over here is because blanc sounds like black, but they mean opposites. They come from the word to burn. This word has emerged in the Proto-Indo-European, the ancestor of all Indo-European languages. Black referred to the color of coal, blanc or white referred to the color of ash. So even though they used to mean the same thing to burn, they grew into these completely opposite colors.
Is that where blank comes from?
Yes.
We won't keep you guys any longer. We went a little bit over.
If you have more questions, you can come
Yeah,
up and ask
yeah.
them. We'll answer them.
So you're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I think you guys should be in time to see the Super Bowl.
Thank you for choosing us
Perfect
over the
timing,
Super
yeah.
Bowl.
Go see.
свидания, спасибо.
Okay. What other like binomials? What are they called?
Irreversible binomials.
Yeah.
Let me write it down.
Say hi for the camera.